This is Sean McClure. I'm here with the one and only Joe Lauzon. Joe, how are you?
I'm doing good. Doing good.
So what are we now? Like 3.5 weeks out from your fight with Jim Miller?
Yeah, we're getting close now.
How does Jamie stack up with Jim Miller?
I think that's usually how he looks to go out there, use his hands a little bit and then, sets up the submissions and, it's a different opponent, but, I'm expecting the same outcome. I'm expecting to go out there and have a good fight, and bring it to him.
As a fighter, is it more difficult to get ready for a fight during the holidays?
What was that? Say it again?
As a fighter, is it more difficult to get ready during the holiday season?
It's a little more difficult. The big thing is training partners. You know what I mean? My coaches, I can usually get around, so getting time in on minutes and that kind of stuff is usually not an issue. It's just getting training partners, sparring days and stuff like that. Everyone has all these holiday parties, Christmas parties, work parties, tons of parties and things going on. So it's a little difficult, but it won't be a huge deal. I have a couple of guys that I know will make it a priority and get the time apart. We'll get it done.
Last time we talked, I brought up the Jens Pulver fight, and I have to bring it up again because these are non-MMA fans that I'm talking about here. And I asked a guy, I said, hey, man, Joe Lauzon? He's a friend of BJPen.com, and he's like, yeah, man, that's the guy that knocked out Jens Pulver. Not the guy who's beaten, all the other people, but still the guy who knocked out Jens Pulver.
It's amazing looking back on the whole thing because I don't think I understood how big of a deal it was at the time, when it first happened, but, now we're so many years later, so many fights later, and that's still the thing people ever remember. It's you knocked out Pulver, you knocked out Little Evil. It's awesome. It really is.
I think a lot of people, and not to discredit anything you've done in the past, but a lot of the newer fans, the guys that were casual fans that are now becoming addicted to the sport, like the rest of us, I think that Jamie Varner fight opened a lot of eyes. I mean, that was a tough fight, and Jamie Varner is no joke, and you came out with your hand raised. I honestly believe that opened a lot of people's eyes. Have you had more attention since that fight?
Well, I think the big thing about that fight was that it was on Fox. It was in front of so many people. It was on a huge card. It was a big deal. To be on such a big event like that. But I definitely, with every single fight, I noticed it more now. There's always more people, coming up to me and getting more recognition and it's awesome to meet all the fans and it kind of seems like it's a lot more than just the diehard fans now. It's like it's moms and little kids.
Right.
There's a lot more people that are coming up to me nowadays.
So you hear, Mommy, that's J-Lo. Tugging on your arm. Well, let's switch gears a little bit because I don't think a lot of people know your background. You are a computer guy. Am I correct?
Yep, I have a degree in computer science.
It's a bachelor's in computer science, and you were a network admin before you started fighting, right?
Yep.
Well, let me tell you something. I'm in the same job right now, and it makes me want to fight. So I completely understand how you made that jump. If you retired, because you probably can young. You're a successful fighter. If you decided to retire, would you go back to that?
Yeah, I have way too much fun, training people and doing stuff in the gym. It would be a little bit difficult to switch gears and go back to sitting in an office all the time. But it's something, I still like that kind of stuff. I still do all my own website stuff, constantly, screwing around with PHP and stuff like that. So, I'm definitely, I'm not really that rusty on that stuff, but it would be tough, just the normal, everyday commute like everyone has to deal with, and, just adjusting, getting all that stuff as opposed to now, I just, I control my own schedule, so I make sure that, when I have to drive somewhere that's far or whatever, that I stick out, I get away from rush hour driving and, I don't avoid the crowds and all that stuff. So that would be the most difficult part of the whole thing.
Yeah, I can't imagine having to make a phone call to Mr. Lauzon to tell him that, my printer's broken or something. I think I'd just let it sit there rather than have to tell you that.
Well, while I was working, I was training for the first fight in the UFC, but I didn't really tell anyone what I did. I didn't tell them that I trained. I really wasn't the guy that was out there telling everyone, oh, I fight or I do this or I do that. I just kind of kept it to myself. But I would always be showing up with like Velcro guards on my face from training, and and black eyes and welts and all that kind of stuff. And people be like, oh, what happened to your eye? And I would just like make it feel like, oh, I fell down some stairs or something. And I think that I had a couple people tell me they thought they had like a girlfriend that beat me up or something like that. And then when I saw Pulver, was on pay-per-view and worked around, and everything changed. I know everyone was like, my best friend, and like they all want to know about it. It definitely it's a little bit different.
Well, let's step it up here. Let's talk about from right now. What does your schedule look like heading into the Jim Miller fight?
So I lift twice a week with Kyle Holland. I go up to McClure strength and conditioning. So I lift twice a week. That takes like an hour and a half. But it's kind of a long drive. So it's like maybe like an hour drive from each way. But it's the best place around though. So that's where I go. So I do that, and then I box 6 days a week. I do MMA 2 or 3 times a week. I do I do boxing spar and do some boxing around a couple times a week. And I grapple, 4 or 5 days a week. So I have a pretty big schedule. Usually Sunday is completely off. Sunday is the rest day. And but other than that, every day I have 2 or 3 different, pretty hard training sessions.
So what is it, 2.5 weeks, and then you'll taper down, or is it 3 weeks and then taper down for you from now?
I think it's 2.5 weeks and then taper down.
Yeah, and I will tell you this, man. I respect fighters, and I especially respect company guys. And you, Rich Franklin, Shogun, all those guys who will step up and take a fight as long as it's not against a teammate, in some cases. And now you're fighting through the holiday season. And Joe, from BJPin.com, we'd like to wish you the best of luck.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.